2004 Red Sox for you guys going down 3-0, coming back. For me, I went to game 6 and game 7 in the bleachers. It was a long story short. I bought the wrong tickets for games. I bought game 7 tickets, went there game 6. Somebody saw me pissed off. I was cursing up the world. So that guy said, give me $75. You going to bleachers. Went back to back. And all of a sudden, you guys get on that epic run. You got A-Rod swatting the ball out of your hand. And that kind of kickstart. I'm out there in that outfield like, what the heck just happened? You know, those are kind of craziness that went on. Talk about 2004 a little bit and the stories and the shilling and all that kind of good stuff you guys had in that whole crazy run.
Yeah, it was a buildup of 2 years. I'd come from Pittsburgh. I've been in that organization for 8 years, not knowing the culture was different in other organizations. And so when I got picked up off the waiver wire by Theo Epstein just prior to the 2003 season started, I went into that camp, in Red Sox camp in Fort Myers, and it was the first time I'd been with the new team. And it was kind of like learning, the way that they kind of operated and realizing that, like I said, the culture of different ball teams was different. And really quickly, I realized I was in a place that was geared towards winning. And when I was with Pittsburgh, in a lot of ways, I mean, they would say stuff back in the old days like, we're going to have the best in shape staff. We don't care if we lose 100 games. You guys are going to be in great running shape. And when I got to Boston, I realized that there was another way to slice the pie. And it was like, no, this is all about winning baseball games. And we don't care if you're in shape or not, as long as you can pitch. And so I really enjoyed that mentality. But 2003, we obviously get beat in Yankee Stadium by Aaron Boone's home run off Tim Wakefield in extra innings in game 7. And that's, a whole deal onto itself. And then you come back 2004, we pick up Curt Schilling, and we've got T-shirts that say this is the year, and the Cowboy Up stuff starts, and we got a crazy locker room, man. I mean, Kevin Millar was really the ringmaster there, who was just kind of making guys like Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz come out of their shell and realize they could be who they wanted to be inside that locker room as long as we played the game hard. And it was really the wildest locker room I've ever been around, hands down. I mean, between Pedro Martinez and Derek Lowe, Nomar was there early on in that season, but you got Johnny Damon. I mean, it was just a man's team, man. I mean, Jason Varitek was the captain. It was an all-star club, and I was just fortunate to be kind of flying under the radar, trying to put up quality starts every 5th day at age 27 and 28. And so by the time we got to the playoffs in 2004, it felt like, this was the year we're going to do this. And then we blink and we find ourselves down 3-0 to the Yankees. And it looks like, wow, we're going to get beat again this season. And then obviously game 4, game 5, Ortiz pulls those off in extra innings, by winning the game with a home run and then a blooper into center. And then we get to game 6, where you're in the house, Todd. And yeah, after A-Rod knocks that ball out of my hand, I mean, you remember the riot crew came out on the field and they were throwing batteries and stuff onto the field and beer bottles. And just, it was almost like, it felt like a war zone in a lot of ways. I'd never been in that type of environment before, but it made me realize that I could pitch anywhere, anytime, any place. And it's part of the reason why when I got to Cincinnati in 2006, I really had a great season that first year, because I almost felt like pitching in the National League was a little bit of there was kind of a weak link there, because not only did you have the pitcher hitting in the 9 hole, but I didn't have guys like Jorge Posada hitting in the 8 hole, dropping 25 homers in a season. So the lineups felt like there was a little bit more breathing room.
Did you throw a battery?
I did not. I was rooting for the Red Sox at the time. I was like, you know what? This can be an epic comeback here. This can be one for the ages. So I knew I was going to play with them. Isn't that weird? I was in college now.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just
thought you were going to play with the Yanks?
No, for Bronson.
Oh, with Bronson. You were like, yo, I'm rooting for my teammate, man.
I already knew ahead of time. Yep. I knew this is my teammate coming up.
See you in 10 years, dude. When you say, I'd never seen an atmosphere like that, what was it? Were there particular instances where you'd be like, that does not occur anywhere else but right here?
Yeah, you just had, you'd never been in a locker room where there was so many great players who also had quirky, things about them. I mean, there was some times when Pedro was, coming to the ballpark at 5:30 for a regular game, and I'd never seen anybody come that late and nobody even blink an eye at it. And then I looked up his stats, and it was like 104 wins, 30 losses in a Red Sox uniform, and you're like, okay, I get it. And then, there were days that he'd be cussing out the media and telling them, don't talk to me for the next month. You make your money, I'll make mine. And then other times he'd be in a great mood and just be running around butt naked. Manny was one of the quirkiest guys I've ever played with. I mean, I would take a nap before every game. Todd probably knows, about 5:30 to 6 o'clock, I'd take a nap for a 7 o'clock game. I'd wake up sometimes and Manny would be spooning me, just sleeping behind me. It was just a crazy locker room, man. I mean, Derek Lowe was super ADD running around. We had Curtis Laskanik, man, who had 2 screws loose. Kevin Millard was screaming at Terry Francona and Theo Epstein every day about 6:40 before the game started. The music's playing. He's taping up. He's treating them like he's his kid, just hollering and screaming at him. It was just a locker room that was just like there was so many guys you couldn't control because they were great ball players. Johnny Damon is like doing naked pull-ups. I'm saying 7 minutes before the national anthem, and then you just blink and he's out on the field and he opens up the game with a triple. And you're like, dude, I don't even think this guy's wearing underwear for the game today.
That's
so
awesome.
It's like, it was just a locker room of guys, man, who just had character and charisma, and we knew we were good. And Kevin made it okay to do anything and say anything. So it was just, Pedro later in that season had brought the smallest man in the world named Nelson from the Dominican Republic. And he was running around the locker room cussing everybody out in Spanish. And I remember Jack McCormick, the traveling secretary, looked over at me. I was putting my tickets in, and he goes, Bronson, he's like, what is that bird doing on that chair over there? And I said, that's not a bird, man. That's Nelson, the smallest man in the world. But he was so little sitting on his lazy boy chair that he looked like a bird to Jack because he was like, Jack was getting up in age. But just a locker room that felt like a circus half the time. And then, you'd go out there and play quality baseball and beat teams down. And then you get back on the bus and Kevin would be on the microphone just getting after it again.
Did you feel like the team was ahead of its time in the way that they were able to be themselves? It's really only in the last, 10 years or so that rookies can come up and say, yeah, I'm not just going to be hazed all the time. I can do what I want. I can even try and command a clubhouse. I can flip bats. I can be myself personality-wise, even if I am quirky or crazy. So do you feel like that team was an outlier, but also you're seeing more of that nowadays?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was, I came up in that Pirate organization and man, people like laugh at me now when I say for 3 years I got dressed up. For 3 years, I was like eating my food in my locker, not saying a word to anybody. I mean, they treated you like a rookie in the early 2000s until you got through arbitration. Now they consider you a veteran after you've had 100 days in the big leagues. And so it was a totally different dynamic. And that team, I believe, was an outlier. Like you said, teams were much tighter, much quieter. You couldn't really be that loose inside of a locker room. But this team was so good. And Kevin was kind of like, was going to make it with his mouth. He was just going to be kind of like a Will Ferrell in a way. And he was just going to make it okay for guys to kind of do and say anything. And you found that when Schilling came over, we heard stories like, don't talk to Schilling or Randy Johnson the day they pitch. And so when spring training started in 2004, you saw that where nobody was speaking to Kurt. You couldn't say hi to him on the day he pitched. And then about a month into the season, if you walked in our locker room, he was sitting there playing cards with the guys the day he pitched because Kevin was so vocal about Kevin's the type of guy who would call you out in front of the whole team and be riding you in a funny way, and you couldn't combat him because he was so witty that he'd be calling Schilling out like on the day he pitched in front of everyone. And then eventually you just realize like, hey, I'm going to relax inside this locker room. There's going to be a lot of crazy stuff going on, but when we go out on the field, we'll be serious and we'll play the game the right way.
That's funny because you really think like the leader in the clubhouse, like it's a pitcher or a catcher. Like what I would think, my question would be, how about like Jason Varitek? Was he a vocal guy? Was he a guy? Because he's the one that got in that big brawl with, you threw the pitch at A-Rod. That's what I want to ask, like about this whole thing. Was Varitek a leader? And my next question, was that pitch thrown on purpose to hit A-Rod? Like what was the whole saga going on over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, Jason was the true captain of the team. I mean, when we went into pitching meetings, he was more buttoned up than any catcher I've ever been around in the game, hands down. When I was with the Pirates, we had Jason Kendall as a catcher, and sometimes, he would just kind of sit on the floor and listen in the meetings as everyone else did. But Jason would have, he'd have an encyclopedia-size notebook, and he would be kind of commanding the pitching meeting. And he was also a guy that out on the field was so flexible. He told me, I don't care what you throw, Bronson. You can kick the ball to me as long as we get 3 outs. And that openness and that freeness that he gave me out on the mound really made me feel comfortable, especially coming to the Red Sox, at such a young age in a lot of ways. But he was really kind of a quiet leader in a lot of ways. Jason, if he had to say something, he would. But he was the guy that if you were going to the mountaintop and you wanted somebody that you knew needed to try to kill a grizzly bear with a pocket knife, I was taking Jason Varitek. And so he wasn't the most vocal guy, but he was this underlying strength that he brought to the clubhouse that you knew that when, if the shit was going to hit the fan, that he was going to be there for the war. And that's what you saw that day with Alex was, there was no intent there at all on my part. I've heard through the grapevine that Alex was a big video watcher And I didn't pitch inside at the time a lot. I was getting away with a lot of breaking balls on the outer half and fastballs on the outer half because the American League didn't know me a whole bunch coming from the National League for a while. And so with Alex, you know, everybody knew he had a kind of a hole on the inner half and he loved to drive the ball to right center. So that day I just went inside and I was just doubling up inside, which is one of the things you constantly hear in your career, which is you got to double up inside to be successful. And so I was just going in there with the sinker. It was, 87 miles an hour, just got away from me trying to stay in there and hit him on the elbow pad. And he got irritated. And there was a lot going on between those two teams, even if you take away Alex Rodriguez. But he obviously is a guy who could be a bit of a lightning rod for a team. He looked like he was very cocky and brash the way he played the game. He was also very good. And also inside that rivalry, I mean, there was fights going on in the clubhouse. I mean, out in the stands constantly. I mean, in 2003, you got to remember that game when Don Zimmer gets thrown down by Pedro Martinez. That same game, Kareem Garcia in right field jumps over the wall, and him and Jeff Nelson fight one of our security guards in the bullpen in the middle of that playoff game. I mean, it's like pandemonium. And so every time we got together, it was you just needed a match to be lit, man, and something was going to blow up, and that's just what happened that day.